subscribe, like, and comment if you're ready to step inside the prison that broke men's minds before it ever broke their bodies. The night Alcatraz reminded everyone why it was feared began with silence, an unnatural, suffocating quiet that wrapped the island tighter than the fog rolling in from San Francisco Bay. At 11:30 p.m., guard William Baker made his routine flashlight sweep across Cell House B. Steel bars glinted back at him, cold and orderly, every man accounted for. Or so it seemed. 30 minutes later, the alarm shattered the stillness. Cell 138 was empty. Frank Morris, inmate number AZ-1441, had vanished from a cell designed to erase hope. His blanket lay carefully folded on the cot. His shoes were still beneath the bed. And resting on the pillow was a human head, eyes closed, hair perfectly in place. Too perfect. Baker reached out, touched it, and recoiled. Rubber. A dummy head, sculpted from soap, toilet paper, and toothpaste, painted with stolen flesh tone pigments. Someone had planned this for months. Maybe years. Within minutes, the island was locked down. Guards sprinted through corridors echoing with shouted orders. Searchlights slashed across the water, illuminating waves black as ink. Boats launched from the mainland, cutting tight circles around the rock. The warden arrived before midnight, his face pale as he stared at the cell. Alcatraz was built to be escape-proof. If Morris was gone, the prison's entire purpose was in question. As the search expanded, another cell was found empty. Then another. John and Clarence Anglin, bank robbers with quiet manners and a reputation for discipline, were also missing. 3 men. 3 cells. No signs of violence. No forced locks. Just absence. To understand why this terrified even the guards, you had to understand Alcatraz. This wasn't a prison meant to rehabilitate. It was a threat carved in concrete and steel. Isolation was the weapon. Silence was the punishment. Men were sent here to disappear slowly, stripped of routine human contact, locked alone with their thoughts while icy air seeped through walls soaked in salt water. Guards didn't fear riots. They feared despair. They feared what desperation could make a man do. Frank Morris was the embodiment of that fear. Born into chaos, in and out of institutions since childhood, his intelligence tested far above average. He read constantly, observed everything. While other inmates raged against Alcatraz, Morris studied it. Ventilation grills, guard schedules, the way sound traveled through pipes at night. He wasn't trying to escape punishment. He was trying to beat the system that said no one ever could. Investigators tore the cells apart. Behind Morris's sink, they found it, the widened ventilation hole, edges crumbling from months of careful scraping with a stolen spoon. Similar holes were hidden behind the Anglin sinks. Above the cells, in a utility corridor few guards ever checked, officers discovered a secret workshop. Raincoats stitched together into a crude inflatable raft. A makeshift accordion-style bellows. A vent cover removed and replaced with surgical precision. This was an impulse. It was a blueprint. By dawn, the tide charts were spread across the warden's desk. The escape window had been razor-thin. Miss it, and the current would drag a man straight into the Pacific, where hypothermia could kill in minutes. Officials told the press what they needed the world to believe. The men drowned. Alcatraz remained undefeated. But the evidence didn't sit right. No bodies surfaced. No raft fragments washed ashore. And weeks later, a flower made of toilet paper appeared in the prison library, left anonymously on a shelf Morris used to frequent. A small thing. Harmless. Except it wasn't possible for it to be there, unless someone wanted the guards to know the story wasn't over. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In a sealed maintenance locker near the laundry room, investigators found a folded note, hidden inside an old work glove. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. It read, simply, "We're not where you think." And suddenly, the most feared prison in America wasn't hunting escaped convicts anymore. It was hunting a truth it could no longer control. By the second week after the escape, Alcatraz no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a crime scene that refused to give up its secrets. The official narrative was already set in stone. The FBI told the public Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. The tides were too strong. The water too cold. Survival, they said, was mathematically impossible. Case closed. But inside the investigation rooms, no one was sleeping. Agent Paul Robertson, assigned to the case quietly and without press attention, had one job: prove the men were dead beyond reasonable doubt. Instead, every piece of evidence he touched did the opposite. The currents that night didn't push west into open ocean as expected. They shifted east, toward Marin headlands, toward land. Robertson ran the calculations again. And again. Each time, the same result stared back at him. If the men entered the water at the exact moment they disappeared, they wouldn't have been dragged away. They would have been carried in. Meanwhile, strange reports began surfacing from the mainland. A teenage boy claimed he'd seen 3 figures staggering along the shoreline just before dawn, soaked and limping, near Horseshoe Bay. Local police dismissed it as imagination. But Robertson didn't. He logged it. Quietly. Then came the Anglin family. 2 months after the escape, Christmas cards arrived at the Anglin home in Florida. No return address. Just names written in a familiar slanted hand. The family said nothing publicly, but one detail caught investigators off guard. The cards were postmarked from South America. Brazil, to be exact. Prison officials brushed it off as a cruel prank. But Robertson knew better. He interviewed the Anglin's mother, a small woman with sharp eyes and tired hands. She never claimed her sons were alive. She didn't have to. When asked if she recognized the handwriting, she nodded once, slowly, then stared at the floor. Her silence said more than any confession. Back on Alcatraz, the mood among the guards had shifted. Some were angry, embarrassed by the breach. Others were unsettled. They had lived alongside these men, locked them in, watched them pace like animals in cages. And now, the possibility lingered that the prison hadn't broken them, it had sharpened them. One guard came forward after weeks of hesitation. He admitted he'd noticed Morris lingering near the utility corridor months before the escape. He hadn't reported it. Everyone needed somewhere to breathe, he said. That decision haunted him now. Then evidence vanished. The raft fragments stored for analysis disappeared from the evidence room overnight. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. Just empty shelves. An internal investigation followed, quiet and aggressive. Someone on the inside was interfering. Someone didn't want certain questions answered. Robertson pushed harder, and that's when the case turned dangerous. A fisherman found a homemade paddle floating near Angel Island. Crude, hand-carved, identical to the sketches recovered from the workshop above Cell House B. It was logged into evidence at a San Francisco field office. 3 days later, the paddle was reclassified as unrelated debris. Robertson confronted his supervisor. The response was cold and final. The bureau was done. Alcatraz could not afford a living legend. Not escaped inmates. Not proof that its psychological warfare had failed. But legends have a way of surviving when the truth is buried too fast. Years passed. The case file gathered dust. Until a photograph surfaced. In 1975, a Brazilian man sent an image anonymously to U.S. authorities. The photo showed 2 older men standing on a dirt road near a remote farm. One wore a faded cap. The other smiled slightly, familiar in a way that made Robertson's stomach tighten. The men looked older, heavier, but unmistakably similar to John and Clarence Anglin. The bureau dismissed it. Robertson didn't. He pinned the photograph to his wall and stared at it for hours. If the Anglins were alive, then Morris might be too. And if Morris survived Alcatraz, then the prison hadn't just failed. It had created the perfect criminal mind. Then came the final blow. A retired guard, drunk and near death, confessed to something he'd never written down. On the night of the escape, during a routine shoreline scan, he'd seen something unusual in the fog. A shape moving against the current. Not debris. Not driftwood. A raft. He never reported it, because admitting it meant admitting fear. And now, decades later, the truth was surfacing piece by piece. 3 men didn't vanish into the water that night. They vanished into history, on purpose. And somewhere beyond the reach of the prison that tried to erase them, someone had made sure the world would never be certain whether Alcatraz truly won. The final truth about Alcatraz did not surface in a courtroom or a headline. It surfaced quietly, the way all uncomfortable truths do, through time, guilt, and things people could no longer carry alone. In 2013, the FBI officially closed the Alcatraz escape investigation. After 50 years, the Bureau concluded there was insufficient evidence to prove Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survived. On paper, the case was dead. But behind that conclusion was a different reality, one stitched together from fragments the public was never meant to see. Among the last people interviewed before the file was sealed was a man named Fred Britzi, a former associate of the Anglin brothers. He was dying of cancer in North Dakota, his voice thin, his memory sharp in all the wrong places. Britzi claimed that in the early 1970s, while working in Brazil, he met John and Clarence Anglin face to face. Not rumors. Not letters. According to Britzi, the brothers were living under assumed names near Rio de Janeiro, working odd jobs, keeping their heads down. They didn't brag. They didn't celebrate. They lived like men who knew freedom could still be taken away. Britzi even provided details, accents, scars, childhood habits, that matched prison records perfectly. The FBI dismissed his testimony as unreliable. But they kept it, because it fit too well. Then there was Frank Morris. Unlike the Anglins, Morris left almost nothing behind. No confirmed sightings. No letters. No photographs. Just absence. Investigators long believed Morris was the most likely to die in the water. He was older, smaller, less physically strong. But those who knew him inside Alcatraz believed the opposite. Morris was the planner, the strategist, the man who understood timing better than anyone else. One former inmate described him chillingly. Frank didn't rush. Frank waited. In 2015, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Police Department, postmarked decades earlier but never logged properly. It claimed to be from Morris himself. The handwriting matched prison samples. The language was careful, restrained. It read, "I'm 83 years old. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brothers. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. I'm sick with cancer. If you announce on TV that I will only get 1 year in prison and medical care, I will give myself up." Authorities tested the letter. Partial matches. Inconclusive DNA. Officially, it wasn't enough. Unofficially, it terrified them. Because if Morris survived, then the narrative collapsed. Alcatraz was not the end of the line. It was a mistake, one that produced 3 men who did what no one else ever had. Survived it. The final emotional blow came from the Anglin family itself. After their mother's death, it was revealed that she had received regular payments for years, small amounts, always on time. She never asked questions. She never told authorities. She simply accepted what every mother hopes for in silence, that her sons were alive somewhere, free. At her funeral, 2 women stood at a distance, dressed in black, faces hidden. Family members noticed them. Authorities did not. By the time historians began re-examining Alcatraz without pride or politics, the truth had already slipped through their fingers. The prison was designed to dominate the mind, to convince men that resistance was pointless. Morris and the Anglins didn't fight the walls. They studied them. They didn't rage against the isolation. They used it. Alcatraz didn't fail because of weak concrete or careless guards. It failed because it underestimated human patience. Today, tourists walk those same corridors. They stare into the cells. They listen to audio guides that end the story neatly, comfortably, with the words, "They drowned." But the water never proved it. The bodies never surfaced. And history has a habit of whispering where records stay silent. They thought the prison won. But if you listen closely, between the waves, between the lies, Alcatraz is still haunted by the possibility that 3 men walked away and never looked back. If this story stayed with you, the next one will follow you even longer.